Hello and welcome to our first edition of African Voice. I'm your host, Tama, and I'm a freelance journalist here in Dayton. This show focuses on African American and Pan African culture here in the Dayton community. Tonight's segment is about Kwanzaa. We're going to be discussing the 7 principles and how it relates to the 7 days of Kwanzaa. Joining me this evening is my guest, Taylor Curtis. Taylor joins me from Sinclair Community College. She is the Director of Black Studies at the college, and she will be joining me to discuss Kwanzaa this evening.
Thank
Taylor,
you for having me.
You're
I'm
welcome.
So excited to be here.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited about this show, and I just want to thank you for bringing this voice to the Dayton community.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for joining me. So to start, can you tell us a little bit about how you begin your career at Sinclair College?
Absolutely. So I actually was a student at Sinclair when I was 13 years old, before College Credit Plus exists, which now is an opportunity that we have for 7th to 12th grade students to be able to take college classes at the cost of the state. And so students can take these classes for free. They can get their college credit and their high school credit at the same time. I did that way before this program existed, and so I did it a little bit differently. But I graduated from Sinclair when I was 18 with my associate's degree in liberal arts with a significant emphasis on psychology, and then I transferred to the Ohio State University. When I was at Sinclair, I had worked as an administrative student ambassador who went around and gave tours of the college, and so I got connected with the college. I worked in our Early Childhood Learning Center with the preschool kids, and in that experience, I found out that Sinclair had an awesome program for minority people to come in and to be able to get jobs that would provide great opportunities. It was their idea of trying to bring people in as faculty that they could groom to build Dayton's own as faculty at Sinclair. And so I went to Ohio State, I completed my bachelor's degree there, and then I talked to Sinclair, and some folks said, remember when we told you when you were working as a student, remember we told you about this program? And I was like, yeah, I do remember that. And they said, remember you said you would never move back to Dayton? I said, yeah, I lied. And so they brought me back. It was a great opportunity. I was able to come in at 20 years old. I was a professor, and I was able to teach in psychology, and that's where my degree is, in psychology. And then I received my master's degree from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology while I was teaching at Sinclair, which was an awesome opportunity for me to be student and faculty at the same time. So as a professor, I knew what it was like to be a student. I knew what was going on in their heads and what responsibilities and different things they had on their plate, because I had the same experience. And so it made me to be a better faculty member, a better teacher, and a better professor. And so I built my career at Sinclair in that way, and I received tenure when I was 25 as the youngest Black female to receive tenure in the history of the United States of America.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
Thank you. The mayor of Dayton gave me a day, Taylor Curtis Day, December 1st.
Really?
And so it was a great opportunity for me to secure a position, but ultimately have a place that I could call home, that I knew that I could be able to really build in the Sinclair community and then build in the Dayton community as well. And so I teach psychology with general psychology and social psychology, but I especially love teaching Black psychology. It has been the door that opened to me to even get into Black studies and to recognize how significant it is to be able to understand where we've been from Africa to America, what that looks like, what that journey looked like, what those experiences look like. How did that oppression affect us then, and how does it affect us now? And what systems do we have to navigate now to be able to be in an equitable place where we have the same type of opportunities that we can actually manifest, as opposed to saying, oh, there's equal opportunity, but we know that we don't get treated in that way, but being able to learn how to navigate in ways that we can receive what we need to be able to be successful. And so that's kind of what brought me into Sinclair, and in that position in teaching Black psychology, I kind of inherited the Black Studies program, also known as the African American Studies program currently, but the name will be changing soon.
Okay.
And in that program, we have some amazing courses that really help you to navigate the world around us, especially in the midst of the racial injustice that we see.
Right.
And so that program is 5 different classes, and it's a short-term program, so you can get it very quickly while taking your other program or your other major or other classes that you're interested in.
Okay.
And so the program's been an awesome, awesome addition to my life, and I've been especially grateful to be able to work with a team of really great people as we are trying to build the program and share with the community what we have there, because a lot of people aren't aware that Black Studies is even something you can study in school and something that you can major in and something that could impact your business and your life in a professional manner in a way that would make you very valuable in the industry, especially now as we see businesses in the community start to recognize the need for change and recognize that they need leaders to step up to be a part of that change.
Right. Great. When you said about African studies, I wasn't aware of that myself, because when I went to college, I didn't take any African studies, but I learned a little bit of it through humanities class, at least that angle, a different angle of it in humanities class. What would you say drew you to specifically wanting to study Black studies?
I never took Black Studies either when I was in college. I didn't know it was a thing.
Okay.
I didn't know that it was aware. You knew about Black History as in Black History Month, that one little tiny piece of the time that we talk about some of the things that happen. But outside of that, my mother kind of influenced me heavily. I was homeschooled growing up, and my mother made it a point that I needed to have these type of studies outside of the curriculum because the curriculum didn't provide it.
Right.
And so outside of a formal education, my mom was pumping me with information and history and experiences and having me research. But even that had no coverage in comparison to what these type of classes provide, which I wish I would have had. What really got me interested was when I became a psychology professor at Sinclair, one of my colleagues told me about the National Association of Black Psychologists, which blew my mind. I was like, wait.
It's like, wait.
There's a group for us?
It's like, wait, what?
I had no idea. I mean, I would have never guessed that I would walk into a facility where there were thousands of people of color who were in the same field, who were professionals in that field, who treated one another like family. I mean, it was just amazing to see. I went to the convention and I became a part of the National Association of Black Psychologists and started receiving mentorship in that program and started helping to work as a student who was working in that system to be able to help pair other people with jegnas, which are what we call our mentors, but they're also warriors who advocate for you. And so I got to be involved in that, and I started to see how beautiful Black psychology is. It's different. Because in Black psychology, we start to talk about the spiritual nature as well as your mental nature, as well as your physical nature, and how these things interact within our environment, especially looking under the lens of people who have gone through this oppression that we've gone through.
Right, and how they tie together as well, the spiritual and the physical part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you think about things like stress, right? We talk about, when you're stressed out, you're stressed out. Well, stress is emotional. It's mental. It's, we're in this negative state or in this state of tension. Right? But that same tension that we talk about, you can feel it in your back when someone's giving you a massage and they say, I can feel your tension right here. It's stress. It's all the same. And it manifests in a physical form, but it also manifests in spiritual forms. And so understanding how those things tie in together, it really brings a different perspective to looking at people, especially people who've gone through the hardships that we've gone through. And looking at how did they survive? How did they navigate? How did they manage? And then what were the lingering effects that are now passed on generationally, not only from us because of our ancestors, but in our society because of the laws and the different things that have been put into place, policies, procedures, norms, ideas that have been put into place in the past that still carry out to this day. And so when we look at all of those things, you know, it's definitely a different lens, and it's something that I don't think many of us even recognize. I have students who come into my classroom who go, I didn't know this was a thing. I just saw black in the name, and I just was curious as to what could this possibly be about. And so that was kind of my step into the door of looking into that. And being in that position, I started connecting with some of my colleagues. And so I teach the Black psychology class in that program. But some of my colleagues are looking at it from a more holistic standpoint. The African American Studies class itself looks at this view of the cultural perspective of a group of people dragged from Africa to America, going through this oppressive process, but now looking at that perspective on everything. From economy to community to the historic aspects and just kind of a general overview. And then our Survey of Africa class, which is taught by Vanya Lewis Thornton. She's an amazing historian, history professor. She gives us a snapshot of Africa over the course of time. So looking at different regions of Africa, different countries, different tribes, what was going on there across time. And Dayton's very special activist, Amaha Selassie, teaches the African American Studies course, and looking at him connected to some of the things in the community and some of the activism that's happening right here in Montgomery County. And then, of course, our history professor, Fahim Curtis Kadir, also teaches our African American history class, where now we're looking at the history of people of color in America and their particular historic experiences. I mean, there are things that people are just now starting to realize happened, like the massacre, the Tulsa massacre that happened, where there was a bombing on Black Wall Street. That hasn't even made, you know, most history books. And so looking at that kind of thing and looking at these different classes really give you a perspective of understanding the real history that's here, as opposed to what we've been educated with in some of our education previously.
So do you feel like the African people here, or African American in this country, are a little bit late from getting the same information as an African in the diaspora, for example? Do you feel like the information is different?
That's a very good question. I think that there is a significant amount of information that is skewed on all sides. I think that when you look at traditional American history, the conversation of what really transpired with slavery and oppression and the things that transpired after that with the Reconstruction era, Jim Crow, segregation, all the way till today, that's not really discussed, I don't think, in any history book. You know, I think that we have some really unfortunate examples where, for example, McGraw-Hill published a history book that's being used in elementary schools that says African people migrated here as if it was a choice, and they chose to come and pick cotton, which is not the truth. And I think a lot of history is written to look very pretty. It's written to make us proud of the country that we are in, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily acknowledge those sore spots in the way that it should. And so I have a lot of students from Africa, and when my students from Africa talk about their perspective of America, it's very skewed based off of the stereotypes and the things that are portrayed in media. And so their perception, that some of my experience, their perception has been based off of media, not necessarily based off of the realities. And so there's still a lot of misinformation that's perpetrated with stereotypes or typical stories of what the Black narrative looks like. And especially across the diaspora, I think also views of stability and views of economy and views of socioeconomic status when it comes to Black people is very different. I think that there's an expectation that in America there's this idea that this is the dream, and that you've arrived. And I've had
Yeah.
students who have gotten here to this community and been in Black communities that are poor because we're in Dayton, which is one of the poorest areas, right? And then they see how life really is for some of us, and they're questioning, what are the things that I've heard all this time, and what happened to the vision that I was expecting to see.
Right. Definitely, I can definitely relate to the we've arrived type American dream, because I'm originally from the Caribbean and I came here when I was a teenager, and I would just go based on the TV and what I would see, and beautiful houses and all of that. And then, when you get here, reality really hits, and you actually have to work for what you want. It's not just given to you. So with that, I wanted to change gears a little bit and talk about Kwanzaa, how it was created, and what exactly is it for people who don't know.
Yeah, well, Kwanzaa is actually one of the staples that we talk about in Black studies, in Black psychology especially. It's kind of embedded in the framework of how we view the perspective of Black people. And that's because Kwanzaa comes from this idea of community. It's about bringing the community together. It's about building the community in celebration together and in preparation together. Kwanzaa was originally kind of this first harvest type of celebration. It was created for the sake of bringing Black people together. It is an African American holiday. It was created here in America, and it was for the sake of bringing Black people together in a little bit of a different way, kind of an ode and a reverence to our African heritage and our African ancestors. So the term Kwanzaa with one A is an actual word that is actually in a couple different countries. It is a Swahili word. But it's also used in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. And so it means first. And so they threw on the extra A to kind of distinguish this particular holiday as opposed to the word that just means first. But again, it's to celebrate the harvest. And just as most people are celebrating the solstice, and around the world, the first harvest is being celebrated in many different ways. And that's where this kind of celebration comes from and stems from. But then we get into the communal aspect. When we look at Africa and the cultures within Africa, we look at a collectivistic type of view. People who are coming together, who are interdependent. We care about each other. We take care of one another. We hear the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And that idea of this is what we do. We work together to achieve what's necessary for the greater good of us as a whole, not necessarily us just individually. And so what Kwanzaa does is it breaks down 7 principles that are celebrated to build that community aspect, to build that communal aspect here in America within people who are across the diaspora. And so Dr. Mulana Karenga is who created Kwanzaa, and in the creation of Kwanzaa, which happened in 1966, it became this thing that spread across the nation as a time to bring people together. And people are already coming together a lot of times for Christmas, right, and to celebrate Christmas together. And so it's kind of from there, it got commercialized, which is something that was recognized, that Christmas was originally about, the birth of Christ, and it's about, the Advent and the original Advent and the new version of Advent, right? But it got commercialized, and that was recognized. Dr. Karenga said, now you're talking about Santa Claus, and you're talking about all of these other things that kind of differentiate from what the real purpose is, and we want to bring a focus to what the purpose should be. And it shouldn't be about materialistic things. It should be about building one another and taking care of one another. And so that's how Kwanzaa kind of formed out of that. And now it's a 7-day celebration. So from December 26th until the new year, you are celebrating every day. Every day represents one of those 7 principles that we call the Nguzo Saba. And each principle is kind of talked about among the family or among whoever is celebrating. There is a host of traditions. So there's always a mat that lays the foundation, that foundation for self-actualization. Self-actualization is being all we can be. So it's saying that we have to have a foundation in order for us to be all that we can be. Then there is the actual candle holder, the kinara, that has 7 holds for the candles, where it's going to represent all of these different things. It reminds people of the ancestral origins, so having an actual physical thing in front of you that can remind you of the ancestors, kind of like how you see in Jewish tradition, there's also a candle holder as well, right? There's corn, which is signifying hope, right, as we're talking about the first harvest and things that are to come. There's the zawadi, or the gifts that are given to the younger generations and to one another, which represents commitment. So oftentimes those gifts will be like a book or something that's going to help you grow in some type of way. And then there's a unity cup that's used to pour libations. So oftentimes to get started, people will greet one another, habari gani, which means what's the news? And then the response would be Kwanzaa, or depending upon the day, you know, you would say that principle of the day, that's the day, that's the news of the day. And people pour out libations almost as like, and this is like the real Americanized version, but like a cheers to the ancestors, right? Like, I'm going to celebrate you in this way. So we pour water into a plant because you're pouring life into that. And you claim the ancestors that you know that have helped bring you to where you are today as a salute to those ancestors. And also oftentimes we do that after asking permission of the elders. And then you can go into your celebration, and everyone can celebrate as a family. Some people celebrate as a community, like the Dayton community celebrates every year in a couple different ways. The Dayton Africana Council always has an event, and then also Sinclair always has an event. And now we're in COVID. And so things are a lot different now for us this year. Sinclair was not able to host our Kwanzaa celebration as they normally do, but the Dayton Africana Elders Council did come up with a virtual version of Kwanzaa that you can find on their Facebook page. Throughout every day they'll have live Zoom panels and different aspects of celebration that will be taking place on every day of Kwanzaa. And also it will be on the Dayton Young Black Professionals page on Facebook as well. So the community can participate and still be involved in that. And Ohio, for the first time, is having a statewide Kwanzaa celebration this year. Yeah, so it's really awesome because you get the chance to bring people together, but then you get the chance to really unpack what does it look like to have true community.
Right. So really what you're saying is Kwanzaa should not just be celebrated during Kwanzaa season, but throughout the whole year, 365. And then back to the point of Kwanzaa being, it falls right around Christmas time. Can you celebrate Kwanzaa and Christmas at the same time?
Absolutely. I think that it is important to recognize that this is not some religious holiday that is supposed to take away from Christmas, which unfortunately, especially in the Black Christian community, I think that there's a lot of lack of information or misconceptions about what Kwanzaa is. I remember growing up and hearing folks in the church saying things like, oh, we don't do that, you know, type of thing, as if it was a different religion or if it was something that went against what Christmas is supposed to represent. But what I found is that it's actually fortifying everything that Christmas is supposed to represent. And that you can celebrate both without having any concern that one is overshadowing or, you know, dysfunctioning with the other.
I wanted to talk about the 7 principles. Can you kind of tell us about what they are and how they are connected?
Absolutely. So the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, we call them the Nguzo Saba. And these principles, like you said, are principles that can be applied to our lives throughout the year and should be applied to our lives. Whether you are of African descent and recognize it and identify it or not, right? We recognize Africa as the birthplace of civilization, and history and science all agree with us on that. But I don't think people really recognize or identify as someone of African descent necessarily all the time, especially if you're born in another country. And so what this is to do is to recognize some of these principles that were founded in African community that we saw as a regular part of life, that was what caused these communities to thrive, that we need to be applying in our own communities so that we could be operating at a higher level. The first one is umoja. Umoja means unity. And so when I think about what that looks like right now in 2020, that looks like the protests that have been happening across the country as we've witnessed Black lives who have been unjustly murdered without having the accountability of the murderers and the justice that should come with that, right? And so you've heard our people now cry, Black Lives Matter. The cry is to say that Black lives matter too, that we haven't mattered for hundreds of years, and now is the time to acknowledge that our lives do matter as well, and that we should be taken care of properly. And not only did we see local groups of people come together when we saw those instances of injustice, but we saw that happen nationally, where every day for days, nationally, people of color and people who were advocating against racism would come together, and they would march together, and they would share that they wanted to see peace and justice. And not only did that happen here in the United States, but 114 countries all marched and stood in that same solidarity to say that Black lives do matter, and that we need to take a stand as a community and say that if my life matters, your life matters, then I shouldn't rest until your life matters as well. And that is a perfect example of umoja, bringing our people together where as a collective, it is about us moving forward as a community, not us moving forward divided. And even beyond the election, right, I still saw the community aspect of people when the Thanksgiving holiday came around, and seeing people strive to work together to feed families, or to make sure that people had food on the table, or to make sure that people had their basic necessities, because people are still in this global pandemic of this coronavirus, and people are still unable to work, or still unable to secure unemployment, or whatever their situation may be, or things just got a lot harder because the kids are home from school now, or whatever the reason was. And so seeing people come together like that, that is a depiction of unity. But it shouldn't take a travesty or a pandemic or anything like that to happen for people to say we need to come together. So we recognize that there are other things happening in the local community that are bringing people together outside of tragedy. The Dayton Young Black Professionals, for example, right? They're one of the groups that will be hosting the Kwanzaa celebrations on their page. But they're also a group of people here in the community who are striving to have professionalism, who are striving to build businesses, who are striving to network, who are striving to build the community by the businesses that they have here within the community, and having a network where they come together and where they grow together and where they experience leadership together. That is unity. That is umoja. And that's what we need to see on a regular basis across our community. Imagine if every American community would decide to just unify outside of some type of tragic accident or something happened or something crazy. Imagine just outside of Christmas, because people tend to have, joyful
Happy
spirits and they want to give and do things for each other during that time. But if we
Christmas,
just held on to that year round, what would that look like?
Yes, absolutely.
And then the next day is Kujitchagulia. Kujitchagulia means self-determination, being able to define ourselves, being able to make a name for ourselves, being able to speak for ourselves. And that is something that I think a lot of times we don't start off having. If you think about it, when you were born, on your birth certificate, somebody wrote, your name, a gender, a different ethnicity. And from those, they started immediately attaching stereotypes and labels to you. If you were a girl, they started saying, well, get her the pink blanket and get her the pink bow and get her this and this and that. You know, and people start automatically putting you into these boxes that we don't necessarily ever uncheck, right? And so we go through life identifying the way that we've been told to identify.
Because it's been passed down from tradition.
Absolutely. And we don't necessarily take the time to really unpack, what does it look like for me to identify myself? I tell my students all the time, you probably think you're your own person, but you're not. And they laugh and they're like, no, I am my own person. And I'm like, yeah, but not if everything that you think, every perspective that you have, everything that has made you you, has come from everything around you without you critically thinking and unpacking that. Right? We tend to come out and say, you know, well, I identify as black. Okay, but what does that mean? There is no ethnicity called black. There is no ethnicity called white. This is a perspective that has been put on you. But the reality is that you actually have some particular culture that comes from some country that has a tribe, that has a language, that has food, that has values, that has traditions, that you may not have received that being passed down, but that's what is within you.
Right.
And we don't necessarily try to identify because the world has already labeled me as black or labeled me as white.
So we just go along with it.
I just go along with it. And so I think as a community, what that looks like is places like the YWCA. They created a mission that said, not only are we going to stand for the empowerment of women and those who have been survivors of domestic violence, but we're also going to specify that we're going to stand for women of color. And beyond that, we're going to specify that we're going to stand for black women. And beyond that, we're going to specify that we're going to stand against racism. I mean, they really took the time to fashion who they wanted to be, how they wanted to represent, and how they wanted to be identified. And now it is a national organization that is like one of the only domestic violence shelters, you know, around that you really get to see in many different lights because that's who they want it to be. I created my own sense of Kuji Chagalier this year in the midst of this pandemic, and that's why I wanted to say it because it's so important. In the midst of this pandemic, we get isolated, and now we're at home, or we're behind a computer screen, or, you know, that aspect of person-to-person interaction just isn't the same anymore. And you and I were talking about that earlier, about how, you know, having life in the room, even if it's a plant, just gives you a different sense of where you are. And I decided that I wanted to identify myself as someone who could provide self-care. And I got with some other ladies who do self-care in the same type of business that I do. And we do self-care through beauty and cosmetics, but inner and outer beauty, motivation, you know, all of those different things. And we came together and said, there's no reason that I should be in my bubble trying to figure out how to do this, and you should be in your bubble trying to figure out how to do this. We should come together. And we came together and we said, we want to define ourselves as the light that's coming from the inside out. We call ourselves Bronze Glow, and we created a self-care type of thing that we do every week where we were like, virtually, we're going to provide self-care, but we're determined to do things in the way that we see fit, not in the ways that other people see fit.
Right.
So that might look like motivation one day, that might look like meditation another day, that might look like a good makeup slay session on another day. It might look like
whatever
skincare.
It takes to
but whatever it takes to really determine for yourselves how you want to be. And in this time, we as a community had to determine, how do we want to move forward? The world will never go back to exactly the way it was before COVID-19. So moving forward, we have the opportunity to be determined, to determine of ourselves how we want to define our community, how we want to move forward in this, how do we want to come together so that as we move out of this, we're living in a world that looks a little bit better than it did before.
So interested that you brought that up. The world that we live in is never going to be the same. You know, today's December 21st. There's a conjunction that happened. Saturn and Jupiter conjunct. So we are in a new age, and so we have to set the tone of what we want going forward.
Absolutely. And it's time to manifest what it is that we want. It is time to start claiming what it is that we are determined to be. Not just what we want to be, but we have to actually have that determination. That's why I love the idea of self-determination, because you have to be decided. And a lot of people say, well, I've got a plan. Well, no. Well, did you write it down? Did you, you might have a vision, right? But you don't have a plan until you write it down and then decide that you want to carry it out. And it's the deciding factor is like 90% of the work, because everything is like 90% mental. If you're decided, there's nothing that can stop you. Because whenever an obstacle comes up, you're going to find your way over it, under it, around it, to get to the next thing, to do what it is that you decided to do. And so if we are determined as a community to make a difference in how we act and to be better than we were before, then we can actually manifest that. But it takes a decision and a commitment to be a part of that.
Right, absolutely.
After Kujichagulia, the third day is Ujima. And Ujima represents collective work and responsibility. So now we're going to take on one another's issues as our own. We are going to recognize that my sister's problems are my problems, and so if my sister needs daycare, then we need to figure out how we're going to get her daycare. In my personal life, that was my experience. I have a goddaughter, and when she was 2 years old, her mother said, I need to figure out how I'm going to raise this child. We need support. And I was like, okay, what do we need to do? It wasn't, well, what are you going to do, right? But it was, what are we going to do? And after that, as I stepped up as a godmother and became more like a co-parent, and for a few years, that child was my child. She's got her own room in the house, was with her every single day, and I was like another parent to her. But that's what collective work and responsibility is. It's not leaving you to figure it out. It's us figuring it out together. And as we work things out together, we come out better in the end. Rather than, oh, well, I figured things out for me, and you just gotta.
There's strength in numbers, absolutely.
There is, and we witnessed that last year when there were the tornadoes that hit the Dayton area, and we watched people come together in ways that we really hadn't seen in this area either before or not in a very long time, where people were coming together to remove rubble and rubbish and all the things that had came from the destruction. People came together to deliver ice to the homes who didn't have electricity. I mean, people were driving from one, suburb area where there was ice being distributed, or free ice where you could come get it, and they were driving it to the communities that didn't have that support. People were putting up tents on the side of the road where they had toiletries and clothes and non-perishable food and all kinds of diapers and things just for people to come get as you need it. People were putting together bags of this is for this age and this is for that age. I mean, it was something that was unbelievably beautiful to see people really taking on, even if their house wasn't the one that was hit, or even if their neighborhood wasn't the one that was hit. That's what that's supposed to look like. Now, if it didn't take a tornado, right, if it was just a regular day and we still thought like that and we still acted like that, it truly would be Dayton strong. Right after the tornadoes, we had the horrific mass shooting that took place.
I was just going to talk, that just came to my thought just now when you said it, the mass shooting. When the mass shooting happened, a lot of people, when the area opened back up, a lot of people went shopping to support the stores and the boutiques that are in that location.
Exactly. That is what we mean when we say we want to have collective work and responsibility. Ujima was present there, and it brought a sense of relief to the community, because it could have easily destroyed that area. It could have easily been the end all, where people are like, we don't want to be there, we don't want to go there, it brings back horrible memories, or it's traumatic, or it was a tragedy. But we saw the people say, we want to reclaim this space where we say that hate does not live here, and we want to reclaim this space as our space. And so you see, if you go down there now, Dayton Strong is everywhere. You know, people have, drawn it, spray painted it. People got signs up just to let you know that we're collectively sticking together.
Do you feel like, even just with this pandemic that we have going on, do you feel like it's bringing people more together, or do you feel like people are being, obviously we're disconnected because we have to social distance a little bit, we have to wear a mask, so there's a little bit of a disconnect, but in terms of, on the spiritual side, do you feel like people have a sense more of collective community?
I think it is. I think that it is bringing people together. I would say, number one, I think families who may have been more disconnected or distant in a general day would be more connected, and even seeing them, virtually gather more than they physically ever used to gather.
Right.
I think I'm seeing in that spiritual tone of things, people coming together to say we need each other, and we recognize that we need each other, and we should be growing together, and we should be fellowshipping together. That's another thing that happened with Bronze Glow. It went from just the self-care Saturday thing to now we have a Monday evening Bible study that came out of that, because people were seeking for more beyond just the physical self-care they wanted and the emotional self-care. They wanted something spiritual. And so now we have a whole other group that faithfully has been getting together for 7 months. Whereas had you asked us last year, do you have time to get together every Monday at 4, I probably would have been like, maybe not every Monday. I would have had a different reaction to that. But I think it also reestablished priorities.
Right.
What's more important to you right now? What should be important to you right now? Who is important to you right now? And how are you getting that? And, how are you getting your cup filled on a regular basis? Right. And I think it also gave people a chance to step back and to realize that maybe life as they knew it wasn't the life that they wanted.
Right.
I think for me, especially, I realized how often I'm busy and working and doing a lot of different things, but not necessarily giving that time to self that I need. I recognized that I also allowed myself to overwork at times where it was the norm for me, because that was the norm of the society around me. But when that kind of got halted with the pandemic, I was like, wait a minute.
Life is so busy all the time. We go to work, we take care of our families, we take care of our children, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and a lot of people, including myself, had to work from home or maybe not work for a little bit. And while we were home, I remember looking on Facebook and seeing a lot of different videos, and I would see people saying, what do I do now? I'm home, I'm bored, and I don't know what to do. And so this was really a time for us to kind of reflect, and maybe there's a project that we wanted to do, maybe there's a book we wanted to write, maybe there is, I don't know, sewing, crocheting, something like that we wanted to start.
Getting back to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was time to really focus inward.
Absolutely. I think that is something that we don't do enough when you have the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and again, what has been established as the norm of our community, especially in an individualistic society. It gives you the pressure that I have to get this done, I have to do this, I, checklist, not we and us and what's important to us as a collective. And that takes away from that time with one another. Right. When you have a mission to get all these things done, it takes away from that family time.
And it also raises the question, is there a different way of life? Does life have to always be rush all the time?
Exactly.
Why can't we just relax and sit back and just take our time to do things?
And we should, because the reality is that in a lot of more collectivistic societies, it's very different. We're not operating on this crunch time of well, at this time, and these time slots on our planner. In other cultures, there's a fluidity of time where it's more about getting the most important things done out of the day and then stopping to go spend the rest of that time building in your community, your family, your time, extended family, fictive kin. You know, that cousin that's your play cousin that's really not your cousin, but that's your cousin, right?
Right.
All of those things like that's important. And when we look at other cultures, they even operate their business time in different ways. There are some cultures that stop in the middle of the day and take a lunch time for the entire community. So everyone stops working, everyone goes home, and everyone takes the time to eat with their families before they return for the rest of the day's work. One of my colleagues is from that country and shared that with me, and I was like, my mind is blown. I don't even have time to eat lunch on a regular day, especially as a professor. You've got classes back to back. You have to spend that 15 minutes in between class very wisely. And if there are students lined up to talk to you, you probably don't have time to sit down and properly eat and digest the meal, and to take time to do that with your family or anything like that. There was a student who shared with me her experience in her country where after lunch, where everyone stops and has a collective lunch, they also take siesta, where they take a nap. Collectively, everyone has nap time. Imagine if we would just stop and have a nap time.
Right. I used to work with a colleague, and she was Muslim. And during the day, she would, sometimes on her lunch break, she would have a little mat and kind of close out her cubicle, and then she would pray, during Ramadan, because they had Ramadan and all that. So, yeah, I remember that.
Absolutely. And that's, even a cultural thing to the extent where they have prayer throughout the day. There are certain times where everyone stops to go and pray. And imagine that kind of collective responsibility, right? This spiritual responsibility to be constantly concerned and thinking about your community and the things that are happening, and to have this time of meditation with the Creator to be able to focus on those things collectively.
Right.
I can only imagine what that might look like here if our country just adapted a time for people to commune with the Creator and like that throughout the day, where they wouldn't be, discounted at work or school or any of those things, but really having that freedom of that time to do that. And for those who may not commune with the Creator, to have that time to themselves to meditate or to think within. I just think as collective responsibility, self-care to spiritual warfare to whatever you want to call it, right? All of those things would give that opportunity.
I like how you said freedom just now, because it's like these principles have been there. It's just a matter of implementing and having the freedom to, carry it out.
Yes. So much so.
Yeah.
And, freedom is more possible when we work together to provide that. But freedom has been withheld, especially within the Black community, the people of color across the diaspora, right? When we look at, people of African descent, which is, by the way, what we mean by diaspora, right? When we're looking at those groups of people, the oppression that's taking place has been so strategic to put us in a position where we don't really value the idea of freedom in certain ways, right? Economically, for example, when we get to the next day, to Ujamaa, we talk about collective, cooperative economics. And particularly when it comes to people who are Black in America, there is a racial wealth gap that exists. And that goes all the way back to sharecropping directly after slavery took place, where sharecropping was kind of listed as something that was now legal, where people who were formerly slaves could still have the same type of job, but because they didn't have the land, they didn't have the products, they didn't have the tools, they had to borrow, and all of these things were on loan. And so the process of paying back, they didn't make profit. They barely made ends meet. And it was still being in this constant place of servitude because I owe you,
Right.
because I am now in debt to you. And from there, we could look at policies that our Constitution has created that go all the way through down to restrictive covenants and housing, and where people of color weren't allowed to get housing in certain areas. This idea that the street could all sign contracts that say we have a housing covenant where we will not sell to a person of color or someone who's considered undesirable. And we look at redlining, where we could look at Ohio and particularly the Dayton and Montgomery County area and still see how redlining from back then plays a part right now.
Today, yeah.
And we can see where those communities are the communities that are disparaged. They are putting corner stores and check cashing places and places that are going to sell liquor and alcohol and those types of things. Those are readily available, and fast foods and stuff. Those are readily available in the communities of color, especially the poor communities.
Right.
But those are designed to maintain that position, because if you're constantly going to a check cashing place, you're constantly going to be in debt, right? Getting check advances means that you're just going to get further into debt, but you're not educated in that. We're not going to teach you that. Right? So you're going to be in constant place of disparity here. Then we could look at, food disparity. Well, why do we have food crises? Why do we have food deserts? Why is Dayton considered a food desert? Well, because of these restrictive covenants, because of redlining, because of the housing covenants that took place back then, along with many other things that contributed to the racial wealth gap, now we have businesses that don't feel like they can establish themselves in our community. And so grocery stores that have full produce aren't going to be, markets aren't going to be establishing themselves in those communities. Those communities also get a bad rap for crime. Well, why? Because you have disparaged people, and you don't expect disparaged people to start working by any means necessary, to start survival tactics to be able to survive. And so when we look at that overview, right, we see that now we have areas that are lacking. And so what happens is our people then tend to move. Let me get out of the hood. Let me get out of this neighborhood. Let me get away from this area. Let me move to a more affluent neighborhood. And so you see people moving out, and there's still nothing being poured in. And so these communities get more and more destitute. When in fact, we could build up the community. If the people who were moving out would pour in to the community, we would see a difference in how that community thrives, how they behave with one another, whether the crime rate goes down or not. All of those things play a role. And so if we had the freedom, we would know these things, but we're not educated in that. The racial wealth gap simulation.
All the while they say we live in a free country.
Right. We are told we live in this free place, but we don't. The racial wealth gap simulation came to Sinclair a couple times. We had an equity summit last year where we brought this racial wealth gap simulation. And if you look it up, you could just Google racial wealth gap simulation. It shows you this interesting little game where you can play to really understand what that looks like. And so you're given these cards where you're rather white or black. And then throughout the game, we go over each different policy, 13 different policies of our government that have established something that impacts generational wealth, and from sharecropping on down, and some that we've talked about. And so during that exercise, I was watching people who were in their 50s and 60s hear for the first time that we have a gap, and why. And if those people had that education in their 20s, what would they have been doing within their community to build in that cooperative economics? And so that's why this particular day is very important in Kwanzaa, because if we don't build a foundation for us to thrive off of, how can we as a people thrive? And so that looks like putting into the black businesses around you. You know, being able to say, instead of me buying these things that I pay full price for with no question when it's on Amazon or when it's at Walmart or some of these major stores, then I'm also going to invest in the small businesses,
Right.
the family-owned businesses, the Black-owned businesses. Or I'm also going to work in co-ops or things that are local that are going to contribute to our community or give back to our community. One of those particularly is the Gem City Market. We watched people say, hey, Dayton is a food desert and we need food in West Dayton, in the areas where people can get it if they do not have transportation to these outer suburbs. And so the Gem City Market's being created right here in the heart of Dayton on Salem Avenue. And now people as the community can spend $10 a month having a membership that contributes to having a grocery store that's going to be there for the people.
Right.
You know, people can be partners and have a partnership in that. We had at one point in time a community garden where people could come and they could garden in one space together, and that food could be for people who needed it or for the people who were gardening in it, right? Those different ideas could be used to build our foundation to have the freedom.
Right.
If we worked for a company that said, we're going to take the time to have lunch together, rather than working for a big major corporation that's not going to take that time because time is money and my money is being wasted if we take it to do this, right? Just that difference in thinking. That's what that day is about working together in those areas. And I really think this community especially would benefit from that, because we recognize it being as one of the poorest areas. We recognize us having these disparities. We've acknowledged that there's a public health crisis of racism in Montgomery County. Now, what are we going to do about it?
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about how policies should be set by the people, because the people are the ones really doing the work. They're, you know, you're doing the nitty gritty groundwork.
Yeah.
And so when you vote a president in office, or you vote an elected official to become either a governor or a mayor of a city, they're really looking at what the people have to say, because we are the people that have to, you know, work hard and put out all the, you know,
yeah, we
get
have to do
stressed
the
out
effort.
and
We
put in
put
the
it
effort to, you know, to make things work. So what we say have a lot of value.
It does,
What
and I
we
don't
say
think we
matter.
recognize our voice.
Yeah.
If we would use our voice in local elections as much as we use it when there's a national election, if we would use our voice even in businesses and in networking, and if we would have that communication and that care, to care about the people who are working in our corporations, our businesses, our institutions, if they would have a care as human beings to hear one another out, to hear what the people really want and hear what the people say, instead of focusing on so much consumer-based, but more people-based. And in Mary Kay, we always say, people and love over profit and loss. If that was the mentality, we would have a totally different experience. Like you said, the people would be setting the standard of what we need for us to function at our most optimal rate, for us to do the best.
And I think that sometimes it's not so much that the people don't want to contribute or don't have a voice. It's the people, their voice are not being heard. And the society set up in such that they control those narratives from, you know, going out.
Right.
And being out there. So, you know, sometimes there's so many barriers that are in the way that we can't always do what we want.
Absolutely. And I think that if more people would adapt these type of principles in their daily life, their voices could be the voice to share these principles. Their voices could be the voice to say, I really think we should check with the people first. You know, people like me learning these principles and then being put into position of director of the program. Now I have the voice to make change, to make decisions, to decide how is this program going to operate. If I did not have these principles prior to that position, I might be operating a lot differently than I am now.
Right. Knowledge is power.
It is.
Yeah.
So much so. So much so. And it requires us to step into that power. It's one thing to have the knowledge. It's another thing to put it to use. And so once we receive that knowledge, then we have to take responsibility and say, I now have a voice.
Right.
And because my voice may be heard above someone else's, I have to use that voice in their behalf, to stand for them, or to, use my voice to help them, or to help you hear them. Right. And not only should I be doing that just with my voice, but just in daily, I should be walking in purpose. And the day after this collective responsibility is about purpose. It's called Nia. Okay. And Nia represents the idea that we have to have a purpose, and then we have to be moving in that purpose, whether that's a purpose as a community or individually within the community. How should I be moving? Right. Everybody is a part. Everybody is affected. Oftentimes we use the term Swahili term Ubuntu. Okay. Ubuntu means I exist because you exist, and you exist because I exist. I can't be all I can be until you are all that you are.
Right. We need each other. Right.
And if we want to have purpose, that purpose means I need to function in a way that's going to contribute to the community, because you need me to function in a way that's going to contribute.
Right. When you speak about purpose, are you also speaking about purpose as in what are you here to do in this, and what were you created here to do? What is your purpose? Finding your purpose and operating in that purpose as well.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to say, like, well, what is your purpose, right? And most people are like, I don't know.
Right.
How do I know that?
Right.
But we find it in passion. You can feel the calling that you have when you start to recognize where you have a passion in something, where, it doesn't necessarily matter what the reward is for you walking in this, or it doesn't matter what the consequence may be for you walking in this, but this is truly just where you feel passion, that you have to be standing in whatever that is. Yeah. And I think that it takes time to develop that. It takes time to uncover that, but it's not going to happen unless you get into the community, until you start to see what's happening in the world around you, and understand what's happening in the world around you, and understand, how does this impact me, and what should I be doing about it?
I totally agree, because I know it's like having a young child, and you put them, for example, when my daughter was young, I put her in I put her in dance class, so she did ballet, tap, and jazz, and she naturally loves to be in front of the camera. And I discovered that very early, because whenever I would get my camera out, she would just be like ready for the camera each time. So it's just a matter of finding your passion and knowing our job on this earth, in this world, is to carry out our purpose.
Absolutely.
I read I saw a quote. It says, your calling doesn't call you. You don't call it, it calls you.
Yes.
So you don't make the decision. It tells you, this is what you're here for. This is what you're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. At Sinclair, we have a day dedicated to Nia, and we give awards. And then we do it kind of like a whole award ceremony, kind of like what you see on TV. We have musical performances from the different music groups at Sinclair. We have, someone coming and sharing about what purpose really looks like. There's always, of course, the libations and the drumming and all of that, but then we give awards, and people are nominated based on what they've been actively doing, either in the community or at Sinclair as a student, or as a teacher, or as a staff member, what they've been doing to really meet others' needs and to really bring that purpose to life. And people get to write in nominations for those individuals, and they get to receive an award, and we celebrate the fact that people are actually out here walking in their purpose, doing things to benefit the community around them.
Because that really serves as a motivation for them too. It's like, well, I want to get an award, so I'm going to make sure I
absolutely
walking in that purpose. Yes.
We also celebrate the next day as Sinclair. We've always celebrated Kumba,
Okay.
Kuumba means creativity. And in the past, we used to have a Kuumba night dedicated to creativity where we would do like a talent competition and let people come and showcase their creativity. And now we've kind of merged it with our Black Love Day, which is another African American holiday to celebrate. And we host a showcase of talent where people just get to bring their creativity to life. And what it really means in the principles of Kwanzaa is not just to be creative as in, you know, I do music or I do hair or I do these different creative artistic expressions, but to leave the world more beautiful than you found it or when you inherited it. And I think as a community, we really have to look at how do we leave this community more beautiful than when we inherited it. And looking at the Dayton community, there's been so much creativity to come out of here. I mean, there have been national artists that are celebrated around the world that come from this little space. You know, we've got, you know, the home of funk. Dayton is the birthplace of funk, you know. So we have some great legends from your Ohio players to...
Yeah, Dave Chappelle is from...
he's in the Springfield area, right here, you know. I'm sorry, Yellow Springs, not Springfield. He's in the Yellow Springs area right here. We have, you know, the Heat Wave, Lakeside, you know, different musical artists. We have comedy, poetry. Paul Laurence Dunbar came out of the Dayton area. One of the well-known poets that you hear about and you actually learned about, you know, in your literature class in school. You know, Wilbur and Orville Wright, the Wright brothers who created flight and aviation, they came out of the Dayton area. So we can really look at Kuumba really thriving here in this area. And so how do we maintain that? How do we celebrate that? And how do we keep creating beauty in this area even when we go through tragedy? And I think what you mentioned earlier about the Dayton shooting, the mass shooting that took place in the Oregon district, there was so much art that came out of it directly after. Dave Chappelle had this huge concert, this block party, where we got to listen to Stevie Wonder live and in person performing in front of our very eyes, along with many other artists.
I didn't get to go to that, but I had heard about it.
I honestly was shocked. I went kind of on a whim. It was a very last minute type of thing, like, can I get these tickets? Let's just see, because it was a ticketed event that you could get free tickets, but you had to be like, you know, get them online in a certain amount of time or that kind of thing. And I really wasn't expecting what I saw, but when I got there, to just see so many people together fellowshipping in joy over this tragedy, to say that we went through it, but we're going to get up and stand up stronger together. And then to see all of these national artists come for free and share their gifts to bring the people together and unify the people and to kind of reinforce the people, to let them know we support you and that we stand with you and that we care about you and you are beautiful people. Let me remind you of the beauty here. I think that was just really, really powerful and something that stood out to me, and I will never forget that because Stevie Wonder performed. I was just like,
That's
wow.
like a once in a lifetime.
It is.
Yeah.
And you know, in the Oregon district, I perform in the Oregon district on a regular basis. I sing in a band called Frequency. And we're there all of the time. And so that was very to my heart, that whole situation, because we're typically there on the weekends. And so we just happened to not be playing that night. And people still invited me out that night, and I just happened to stay. I'm staying in for the night. And I was woken up with phone calls from everyone all night long, thinking that I was down there at that shooting. And you know, the reason we're down there all the time is because it's a space for community to just breathe,
come together,
and we bring that beauty, and we bring people of different ethnicities, different ages together. In our band particularly, we play world music, where it's not just one genre that one group of people tends to be drawn to, but it's everything, and we fuse things together, and we mix and match things that you would never expect to hear in the same song, but it's all to just show that we're all different. And if we even mix and match our personalities, our experiences, bring people together, it really doesn't matter the difference. It tends to make a beautiful song when we're in it together. And we really can impact the world one note at a time, or one person at a time, or one day at a time, or one principle at a time.
Exactly.
And so it requires you to believe, though. It requires you not only to be decided, but to believe that you can. I tell all business owners when they start a business that your belief is the main factor of whether or not this business will or will not be successful. Because if you choose to not believe in yourself, or you choose to limit the beliefs that you have and what you're capable of, then what you do is you allow yourself to focus on the wrong thing. And what we focus on is what grows. What we focus on is what expands.
Exactly.
And, you know, as a psychologist, I talk about our brain, and we actually have the ability to change the physical structure of your brain, to strengthen connections or to let connections wither away and die based off of what we focus on and what we do. And so if we decide to believe in something and we actively practice that and we actively think about it and we actively stand by it, what we do is we strengthen those connections in our brain till it's flourishing like a plant, as opposed to cutting the dead ends off and letting it die. And although all of us may not have a green thumb, some of us have the ability to have that in our minds and to be able to grow in that. And so the last day is Imani, which is faith. And it's about believing not only in yourself and your ability to make a difference in this world, but believing in our ancestors, that they did not just leave us out to dry, but they have set information and they have set plans and they have set strategies for us to survive that we could just pull back on and look at and be able to use. Having belief in our people, our educators, our parents, knowing that there will be change that comes out of those individuals, and believing that they will help us thrive as a community, having belief in one another and having belief in self. And, you know, some people look at faith as, you know, the substance of things that they hope for. But that substance that you have to walk in. You know, when I want something to stick to my ribs and to fill me and to satisfy me, I need substance.
Right.
If I eat, you know, something that doesn't have a lot of substance to it, I'm going to be hungry again a little bit later. So what we have to do is we have to walk in a way that will satisfy that belief. So we can't just believe it. We have to act it and live it. And that's what Imani is about. And I love the fact that people have adapted that as a very beautiful name to use for their children.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that have Imani as a name.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Taylor, for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
I am really grateful that there is now a show that brings this voice to the community, and I look forward to seeing this voice be used so much more.
Thank you. You've been watching African Voice. I'm your host, Tama. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you next time.